Okay, so thank you for joining us today. For our interview, I'll be asking a series of questions about your experience with disability activism in Utah and with your mom, Barbara Toomer, in particular. We have up to an hour for our interview, so please feel free to share stories in as much detail as you can remember. You're welcome to speak for short or as long as you would like. So to get started, could you introduce yourself and a little bit about your background?
Yes, my name is Jennifer Toomer-Cook, and I am Barbara Toomer's daughter. And that's how I grew up. Everybody would say, oh, that's Barbara's daughter. That's Barbara's daughter. And so that's kind of who I am. I'm a graduate of Weber State University and of the University of Utah. I'm in the communications field. I'm a former reporter, which I wonder how much I may have been influenced by my mom to go into journalism because she always had reporters at her house growing up. But I'm now in public relations.
And for those who don't know, Barbara Toomer is the founder of the Disabled Rights Action Committee, has been involved in disability politics in Utah for a very long time. What was it like growing up with a mom who was at the forefront of a movement like this?
So I didn't really know how much at the forefront she was. My earliest memories of the movement. Sorry, my dog's itching her. She's on the bed and itching, and it's making my camera go. But she was on the forefront. Really, the first thing I remember is the Utah Independent Living Center when she was working with Debbie Mayer, and they really wanted. I think it's all along a continuum of advocacy. She wanted people to view people with disabilities as equal. There's equity, there's equality, that people with disabilities can be employed. People with disabilities have housing needs. People with disabilities can contribute to their communities. People with disabilities have voices that need to be heard in the public sector, in government, and in the private sector, in businesses, all around us. They're part of the community, and start seeing people with disabilities, and to let the people with disabilities in the community know that there were places to help you gain access to community resources and advocacy when you need it. And that was how I viewed the Utah Independent Living Center. So we had many of her friends. They would do activities, just pretty much just fun things, picnics and road rallies. I loved that. I got to be the navigator on the road rally when I was like 5, tell my mom when to turn right and all that kind of stuff. It was kind of like a geocaching thing way back when in the 70s. But I really, the memories start to crystallize really around her first big push was to have ADA parking that was required, that had certain space requirements, that had teeth in the law, so that if people just decided to park in ADA parking, there was a fine for that. There was a reason that you shouldn't. Before that, it was just it almost seemed like people would just put up a sign with the universal symbol for a wheelchair, and everybody parked there, though. I remember my mom, I think it was through the Utah Independent Living Center, created these little blue cards, and they were about this size, maybe a large index card. And they had kind of just a funny little sketch of a cartoon on, someone using a wheelchair. Oh my gosh, hang on just a second. My dog just took my AirPod.
Oh, you're just fine.
Good girl. Okay. Sorry. Puppies.
Yeah.
But it had a little cartoon on it, and it said something to the effect it was like a little dialogue with the person who uses a wheelchair and the person who had just parked there, and basically saying, hey, this is here for a reason, and people with disabilities need this so that we can, access buildings a little bit better. People used to park over the ramp. I mean, it was just, people were just, it wasn't because they were jerks, it's because they just didn't know. There wasn't any awareness of this stuff. So she really tried to get awareness, and she would put these little cards on underneath a windshield wiper, like a flyer or a parking ticket. And they were like just a light blue. And I remember we would do that everywhere we went. We'd go grocery shopping. We'd do it. We go to the mall. We would do it. We do it at the movie theater. Anywhere we went, we would do that. And I remember once we were at the mall, and my sister, who's much older than me, and so she was 17 years older than me, so she was already a mom herself. But we were at the mall once, and my mom had lifted me up, and I put that in there, and this guy came out. He was so mad, whoo, hopping mad. But I just loved how my mom handled him, and my sister handled him. He was swearing at us and yelling at us, telling us to get our hands off his car, and I was terrified. But my they just said, thank you for listening, and please don't park there because we need that, and here's why. And they just educated. And I think that was really, I think, a recurring theme being raised by my mom, Barbara Toomer. She was an educator at heart. Once she wanted to, when she was younger, she wanted to be a PE teacher because she was an athlete. And I think that teacher part never left her. I remember when we would go grocery shopping, there was a time, and I always felt I needed to defend my mom for some reason, which is funny because she was, she scared many people into letting her in their office or pass legislation. I mean, she had enough power, I guess, to make things happen. But I always felt as little, I had to defend her because people would stare at her, and I thought it was so rude. Even when I was just little, I'm like, what are you looking at? I felt like one of those, kids. What are you looking at? I remember doing that at the grocery store once, and the teacher and my mom, I yelled at the kid. My mom, Jennifer, we don't act like that. She was very polite, and then she took my hand, and then she invited the people to come over. She said, would you like to watch me get out of my wheelchair? This is my wheelchair. Would you like to touch it? And I'm like, Mom, they can't touch your wheelchair. That's my property. That's my mom. Because a wheelchair is kind of part of your being. When someone grabs your wheelchair, it's like grabbing your arm. It's not acceptable. So I was like, no. And she's like, yeah, come on over. So this family and this mom came over and touching her wheelchair and everything. I didn't like it. I didn't like that at all. But she did. And she let them marvel in it. And she let the adults ask questions. And she was always smiling and let me show you. And look, my legs don't work because I had polio, but look what I know how to do. And I can do this, and I can drive my car. And, they wanted to see how the hand controls worked, and they wanted to see how she was able to get around like that. And I look back and I think, well, that's brilliant. If you don't teach people, if you teach people, what are you looking at? Don't look at me. Well, then they don't see you. And isn't that the point of her advocacy? If people don't see you, you don't matter. A lot of people say that, that person never even looked at me. They never saw me. I'm a person. She not only let them see her, she educated them at the same time. And I think that's a huge lesson. And I think that really served her well in the disability movement.
Yeah, absolutely. I know your mom is also famous for the work that she did on the UTA crawl-ins and blockades in the 80s. Do you have any
Yeah.
memories of that period in her history, or the kind of the
Yeah.
event going on at that time?
Yeah, that was at a time. So my mom had post-polio syndrome that really got her in the early 90s, and it made it so soon, well before the year 2000, she essentially became quadriplegic because the strength in her arms had just left. And they didn't know what it was, but it was later termed post-polio syndrome, and where it kind of, for lack of scientific explanation, just reclaims its stake in your body. It just kind of rejuvenates and goes to reattacks the body, I guess, is what my mom used to tell me. But I remember the crawl-ons. I wasn't there as much when I was little in preschool. I was in school, but that's when I started to have an awareness that not everybody's mom was on TV. My mom was always on TV. My mom was always in the newspaper. We had reporters come to our house. They take pictures. They take pictures of her dress, like doing up the buttons or the zipper on the dress that she made me. She made all my clothes. She was a homemaker. She painted and decorated, and she did flowers, and she did gardening. She's massive. We had a massive garden, and she was always out there weeding and hoeing the garden. And tending to it. And we had wonderful tomatoes. Oh my gosh, I love those tomatoes she would have. She did everything. She was a 70s housewife, right? 70s and 80s housewife and 60s. That's what she did. She raised her children, stayed home, and then she advocated. But I always thought everybody's mom must be in the paper because that's what my mom does. And she was very popular in the neighborhood. She was a local religious leader and everybody loved her. And she just kind of was, she substitute taught. She was a delegate. She just kind of was everywhere. So I was like, oh, not everybody's mom does this and not everybody's mom's on TV. Because my fifth and sixth grade teacher started making comments. It's called, I saw your mom on TV last night. I'm like, oh yeah. And all the kids turn around and stare at me. And I'm like, what are you looking at? Isn't your mom on TV? But apparently they weren't on TV, just my mom. And then I remember the crawl-ons. All my teachers were saying stuff. I think I was then in seventh and eighth grade, and teachers all over the school were like, I saw your mom. Tell your mom, good job. That's so cool. Your mom's doing this stuff, and your mom's really brave. And I'm like, yeah, I guess my mom's pretty brave. This cool teacher's telling me my mom's cool. My mom's brave. You just look at your mom. It's your mom. But I remember the clips she would show me. It was when VCRs were new and we had a VCR. We tape record all her news spots, and I liked watching them. And I remember watching that one downtown Salt Lake. That's the first big action I really remember, because when I watched it, it was hard to watch. And that's the whole point of that direct action is you had the bus comes up, all the cameras are trained on these other folks who did the crawl on. My mom didn't have the strength to do the crawl on, but she was a spokesperson. And so that was what they did. They are all sitting there. The bus comes and they just launched themselves out of their wheelchair and they crawled up the bus. And all these people on the bus were just mortified. And these people just crawled up the bus, and the bus driver's like, because that's hard to see, even with people around us, because someone, if you need a wheelchair and you're not using a wheelchair, that's hard to see. You want to help that person, but they wouldn't take the help because they were making a point, and it was well taken. In terms of tactics, that was absolutely brilliant. I'm in PR now. I'm like, dang, that was brilliant because that got stuff done. Stuff started moving. Nobody wants to look that bad. And UTA she had them in a corner, right? And she wasn't the only one. They were stopping buses in Denver. That was her first. I learned later that was her first direct action. Is she went to Denver, and this is in the earlier 80s, mid 80s, and joined their action where they stopped the buses. The buses were in the intersection, and they all just took their wheelchairs out in the intersection and chanted and stopped the buses. And when you do that in a major city and bring traffic to a halt, people pay attention to you. And I just thought that was really cool. That was really cool. It never occurred to me that she wouldn't be safe. Mm-hmm. The only time it occurred to me she wouldn't be safe or that she might be harmed by that, because I just always thought, that's really cool, Mom, you go, was when she went on a hunger strike in, I think it was either Cincinnati or St. Louis. Also, they were talking about accessible public transportation, and it was with Adapt National. Mm-hmm. And she was jailed, and usually they jail like 100 people with disabilities. It overwhelms the system because they don't have the medics, they don't have the care, they don't have people, help them transfer, do all these things. It really overwhelms the system. Well, that judge didn't care. He let them sit in jail. And I guess there was some type of stipulation. I'm probably butchering this, but there was some type of stipulation where, okay, people, if you never do X, Y, and Z, then you can get out of jail. Well, they wouldn't stipulate. They would not cave. And so they went on a hunger strike. And I'm just guessing that when you got people who've never been around people with disabilities and they're all in a hunger strike, that could be pretty scary. The judge relented, brought him in, and just said, you're banned from the city. And they said, great. And off they went. But point was made. And I hope the correctional system also got clued in to, we still have to take care of people, because not everybody who comes here has a life sentence. People come here and it's civil disobedience, and it's not like some violent crime, and you got to take care of people.
And you mentioned that you were afraid for your mom's safety because of that action.
I was. Yeah, I didn't like that. I was probably 14 and I didn't like the hunger strike, and it was no food, no water. And that was the first time I thought, "Oh my gosh, what if she dies?" You know, because you're a kid and you don't want your mom to die. I remember crying, "Mom, don't do that." And she just said, "This, sweetheart, this is what we do. This is how we secure equality. This is how we are recognized as a people. This is how we get the freedoms and the equal access that everybody else has." And it was pre-ADA and all that stuff, so it worked. Whether
Yeah.
it was fur action or it was really all of ADAPT and all of Judy Humans folks too, that it all came together
Yeah.
and worked.
Do you remember anything about the style of your mom's activism changing after the ADA was passed? I know that the work leading up to the ADA was pretty different than what we saw later.
Yes. So after the ADA passed, she went into more of a enforcement mode and enforcement on things that you don't necessarily think of. So ADA, okay, here's your parking and here's your bathroom stall. Well, were the toilets high enough? Was there enough room to turn around? So it was really the ticky tack stuff, but stuff that mattered, because you can put a wheelchair symbol on something and it still doesn't work. It violates the law. So I knew the law really well, right after it passed, because I knew what she was looking for. I knew the law. I knew that if your building's over 100 years old and it's historic, then you can get an exception. Because we're in Washington D.C. in the older part, and I'm like, why is there, we wanted to go to this bar, it just looked really cool, and I'm like, it was old, and I'm like, Mom, we can't get into the bar because it's it's got a billion stairs. She's like, oh, I'm like, this is illegal. No, 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 that's okay. But she would do enforcement of ramps, enforcement of the grade of the ramps, the doors that were too heavy, the push plate that was too high for her to reach by that point. um, she did observational studies where they would sit and observe at buildings that had the ramp, even when it went around and around, to make sure the grade was okay, and then steps up the front, and people were taking the ramps. She went to Dillard's, I remember, and I think she also went to the ZCMI Center, and she tried to get through they were too close. The aisles weren't wide enough, and she couldn't get through to shop. And she did a demonstration that way. And I thought another a brilliant thing she did is she stopped saying, well, people in wheelchairs need this, and she started to say mothers with strollers need this. And another brilliant thing in Utah, because everybody's pushing a stroller, right? I mean, not everybody, but we're
Mhm.
kind of the child capital of the United States. And so to have her grab another group that already had access, to say even they don't have access, it's about your people you see every day, your friends, your neighbors, your grandchild, your daughter who can't get through. I thought that was another really good way to go for ADA enforcement. She also did, I remember the SkyWest debacle, because she was often asked to come and speak on ADA. And I'm not sure who her audiences were, but I like to think it was people who were builders, or people who designed buildings, or people, government, or people who were business owners or something, to ask her why this mattered. I don't know, but that's what I like to think. And she was taking SkyWest Airlines to go to a speaking engagement. And what I also thought was really cool about her is we didn't have a lot of money growing up. My dad was very frugal and saved, did very, very good saving to make sure that we always had what we needed. But we did not have a lot of money, and she would not accept the honorarium. Like, Mom, take the money. And she's like, she just felt that was wrong. When you start, taking money, then people expect something from you. And she's right. I mean, they do, everybody's paid to play. But she wasn't for sale, but she'd love to come for free, pay for her. She had to pay for her to get there because we couldn't afford it. But then she'd go. So she goes to SkyWest Airlines, she gets on. And my dad always, before we had terminals and you had to like go down onto the tarmac and climb up the stairs. I mean, my dad would put her on his back. They were both in the Army, so that's where they met. They were Army officers. And so he'd carry her up the stairs, and then he'd put her in her seat, kiss her goodbye, fold up the wheelchair, put it someplace else. Well, on this time, it was something she could access. And my dad took her to the airport, and they're like, well, something to the effect, well, sir, aren't you staying with this woman? And he's like, no, I'm just kissing her goodbye, like, husbands do. and they wouldn't let her get on because she didn't have an attendant. She's like, why do I need an attendant to sit here? And it was a big stink. They wouldn't let her get on that flight, so she missed that speaking engagement. Oh, she was on fire, man. She came home. I don't remember what I was doing. I just remember sitting there at the table, and it was first thing in the morning. She was hopping mad, came in, called her lawyer. I remember that was the first time I was deposed, in something from my mom's case, because they wanted to know how angry was she. So she was mad. I told them all about that, what time she came home and how mad she was. But she I don't think she won that case. I think they could, unless they received federal funding, I think they could deny access if you didn't have an attendant or something to the effect. It was a bummer. But and I would have to look it up to see what the effect of that was. But so she took to the airlines too. And that's the thing, is the ADA is for everybody, right? She used to always say that, but the older I get, it's true. I like to take the ramp. When I'm pushing a stroller, I like to take the ramp. When my kid's on crutches, we take the ramp. At the dentist's office this week, there was a woman who was using 2 canes and easily in her 90s. She didn't see the ramp. She was trying to get down the stairs, jumped out of the car. I'm like, ma'am, there's a ramp. And she was grateful to see the ramp. It's for everyone. Everyone needs space to turn. Everyone needs to be able to walk through an aisle. Everyone needs to not have a really heavy door to open. It's for everyone. And when we treat everyone with equality and dignity and respect and allow them to have their own, self-reliance, that it benefits everybody. I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And your mom founded the Disabled Rights Action Committee in 1990. It incorporated
Yes.
as a 501c3 in a couple of years later. Do you remember anything about her involvement with DRAC specifically and the types of actions that she would go on? I know DRAC has partnered with ADAPT National over the years, and so it can be difficult to kind of separate the work with one or the other. But do you remember anything about the DRAC chapter here in Salt Lake City?
Yeah, I do. I remember them doing the type of enforcement. I remember when I was in college, I was a student newspaper reporter, and they were doing an action, and I wanted to just kind of look at this is before students were doing protests. It was like students did protests in the 60s and the 70s, and then something happened and they hadn't really regained. And now they're doing, pride marches and all this other stuff, anti-gun stuff, it's great. Lots of marches with our young people, but it was like in a time where it wasn't. And so I was just looking at a story like, what are the brass tacks of petitioning government and actions? And so I went on one, and I remember they were just going back and forth protesting outside I believe it was a dental office or medical clinic, because it didn't have a ramp. And so it was that, and media came. They had a couple TV stations come, quick rip an interview, and off they went. But I thought it was good that she was taking ADA in her community and making it happen. They were also a presence on Capitol Hill. I remember DRAC occupying the governor's office because they couldn't get a meeting, and so they just slept in Governor Levitt's office. They did a Marty Town thing where they it was the House Speaker was Marty Stevens. I was a reporter by then, and I'm up there, and it was just kind of fun to walk by and, good morning, Mom, good morning. She was with her, mask that looked like the House Speaker. Everybody wore the little mask of the House Speaker. It was like, she's really good at taunting people and not to get her way, but to just, my good night. Everybody else has access to people on the floor. I sit and watch it. I had access to people on the floor, but this group of people who wants to actually ask questions and provide comment doesn't get called on in the meeting or get a meeting with their government representatives. I mean, come on, guys. Come on. So whatever she did, it usually worked because it got a lot of media attention because it was just fun. She was smart. So they did that kind of stuff. They did enforcement. Curb cuts were a big thing that they were doing in the Didi Cordini administration in Salt Lake City. So that would have been the mid 90s, maybe late 90s, 95 to 98, I think. They did a lot on curb cuts, and that was big. I remember we went to the Shakespearean Festival in Cedar City, and we with my best friend and my mom, and because we wanted to go see these plays, and it was really fun. But by the time it was time to go to the play, it took us like forever to get there. And I think we were late because there were no curb cuts. We had to seriously go all the way around the block, find a curb cut, go down, because by this time she was motorized. Before, when I was a kid, I would just push her up and down the stairs. I'd like pop the front and push it up. But man, we went everywhere, and it was a total drag. And I'm like, this is crap. Mom, this is horrific. This should not be happening, and she's like, yeah, that's why I'm fine for curb cuts downtown. So that was the always thing. I think everybody should go with a person with a disability around town that's not accessible one day, or even that is accessible for one day, and see how it happens. And I think if every policymaker hung out with a person with a disability for just a few an afternoon, or go out at night with them, things be a lot different, a lot more quickly. That should be the next thing they do.
Yeah,
Honestly, it opens everybody's eyes.
absolutely. We also know a lot about your mom's involvement in Denver in kind of her earlier days in disability activism and how that influenced Utah's movement here. We know that she was involved in ADAPT, which did a lot of work in DC. It seems that she was very involved in helping the disability rights movement kind of pollinate across the country and helping ideas spread from, location to location. Do you remember anything about your mom's travel and how she helped to spread ideas and the people that she worked with in other cities?
I remember, so on these years, I was a teenager and a young adult, and college, and then a young professional. So I know she was traveling by the time I was in high school. She was traveling all the time. And the phone, it was like early days of voicemail. I don't even think it had been invented yet. Voicemail came around like after that. But oh man, the phone rang off the hook all the time from people from different states. I remember taking down different area codes, and my dad used to joke that he was like her secretary. My dad was already retired, but holy business, she just had a ton. She had a ton of people calling her. She had a ton, and her favorite ones. And this is kind of funny. The favorite calls she would get were folks who had seen her, or friend of a friend of a friend, and they were newly disabled and they needed help. She dropped everything to help people. She wanted to push the rights, the access, the equality, and that's what she's known for. But more than that, what people may not know, she dropped everything for people. If somebody died, she would go whip up a casserole and take it over, or put it in a bag and drive over and make me run it up to the door. She took care of people. She was one of the most compassionate, decent human beings I've ever known. And that is the honest goodness truth. And she led so many people and taught so many people that it's people first. I think that's why she was so big on people with disabilities. We're not the disabled, we are people with disabilities, because she cared deeply for people. Those were her favorite calls to get.
Yeah. And, now in 2021, thinking back at all the progress that we've made over the years in disability rights, how would you contextualize your mom's legacy and the impact that she's left here in Utah and then also nationally?
I don't know if you can. I mean, I think it's important my mom was an exceptional speaker and frontman. She was kind of the face of the disability movement here. And she had kind of a quality that Governor Walker had, that everybody thought she was this really sweet lady. Oh, you're sweet, Mom. She's so sweet. And it was her secret weapon that she was so smart and strategic, and diplomacy had a limit with her, and she was for women's rights before anything. I mean, this is a woman who was an Army officer in 1951 through 53. That's a woman leader. That's a women's equality, gender equality woman. And it was kind of her secret weapon, where people would, they kind of pat her on the head. When you're in a when you're using a wheelchair, you're short in stature. And so people would look down on her literally. And, oh, it's so good to see you. And she always liked her white hair. She dyed it blonde for a little bit, but she always looked better with white hair. So she looked like a little old lady. And it was almost like, it sounds terrible. She like a coiled snake. She just, thank you so much. Come get ya. She just wouldn't put up with any crap. And that's, I think, why she was the face of it. She knew the language, she knew the culture, she knew how to adapt within it and not take no for an answer. She was always decent and kind. And I think that goes a long way. They say you attract more flies with honey than vinegar. And she had the honey going, but don't call her that. Don't call her that. But she did. She was able to be kind and decent, but do what's right. Always do what's right. And I mean, even her, like, people who were on the other side of expensive lawsuits, they always hug her. They loved her. She was decent and funny and kind, but don't mess with her. And that's respectable. She always behaved, I think, in a way that commanded respect because she gave respect. But it doesn't give respect to kowtow to people, and she never did.
Yeah.
She had that army in her. She knew she had sergeants under her. They did what she said because she treated them with respect. And so I think that's how it worked. Everyone was equal in her view. Everyone comes together around a common idea and we can all do it together. She didn't care if you were blind or deaf or able-bodied or, have cerebral palsy. You want to participate, you're just as good as she is and anyone else. And I think that helped her drive forward. And she just ended up being the face of it. I think most people who end up being the face of a lot of movements don't really know why. But she just didn't have any more guts than anybody else. She just happened to fall into that. She was a good speaker. So I think the effects, that's a hard question. I don't know. I think the effects of that are all that knew her and loved her. And even those who hated her, they won't forget her. And she made her mark that way. I think she made her mark with her humanity, with her intellect, with her strategy, with her mentorship, with her love and caring for others, her example. She was always, people upheld her as a hero, and some in a way that is a little bit demeaning, but most in a way that they didn't mean it in a demeaning way, even though it kind of was for some of them, but it was more just a respect that she had. And I think her legacy is that as a human, and a mentor and a friend. But I think it's every time you go downtown and you see a curb cut and you see someone using a wheelchair that, when I'm at work and I see a physician come in and she's using a wheelchair and I just want to go, yay, you're like my mom. Look how cool that is. Without my mom saying, see me, don't institutionalize me, see me. Work with me. I'll work with you. I'm a contributor. I don't know if that physician would be a physician, I like to imagine she had that kind of and all those who worked with her. She wasn't alone in this. She was a very small piece of a very big movement. But I like to think that.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any other topics that we haven't touched on today, but that you'd like to speak about, or any stories that we've missed that you'd like to share?
No, it's just kind of like, how do you talk about your life when you're still living it and the influence your mom had? It's just they're she's an incredibly influential woman. And everybody loved her. Everybody loved her. I think.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.